Why, hello there! With the release of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis on mobile, which I am playing and enjoying it, but I'll make that another video. With the release of that, and also with the release yesterday of the trailer for FF7 Rebirth, I thought today I would go over and... Hang on, I think someone's knocking. No, it's just the neighbor bashing something. With the release of the trailer Rebirth, I thought I would go over and review some of the, well, all of the novels set within the FF7 universe. I haven't written anything down. I'm just going off the top of my head here, just spitballing. Hopefully I haven't misremembered anything or forgotten anything. See how we go. So the three books are On the Way to a Smile, The Kids Are All Right, A Turk's Story, and the most recent one, Traces of Two Pasts. All right, so we'll start with On the Way to a Smile. Now, we'll go by chronological order as opposed to release order. So this one here, On the Way to a Smile, is a collection of short stories, each one told from the perspective of a different character. From what I remember, none of them, or most of them don't link with each other. They're sort of their own sort of individual stories, but they're all set between the original Final Fantasy VII and the Advent Children movie. It's like a bridge novel. Sets up things that will appear in Advent Children, but this one more so sets up a lot more than this one does for Advent Children. This is more like a sequel to 7, whereas this one's more like a prequel to Advent Children, if that kind of makes sense. Okay, so I'll look at the chapters, and I'll just sort of go over what each one was about. I'll try to keep it as spoiler-free as possible, because I do think you should read it if you enjoy FF7, but I'll do spoilers sort of towards the end of the video. Episode Denzel is the first story. If you remember, in Advent Children, Denzel was the little boy who Tifa and Cloud, they found him affected with the geostigma, the Sephiroth disease, took him into the bar, and he sort of became one of the gang. This goes into his time from when Meteor fell up until when Tifa and Cloud find him. That's pretty much all it is. Like, it bridges the gap, it bridges it well, and I believe it was also adapted into an anime OVA. From what I remember, I don't recall any differences between the two, but being in book form, obviously there's a lot more internal dialogue and things like that. Now, in between each chapter in this book, it flip-flops between chapters called Black and White. The Black chapters are they're like half a page to 1 page, just sort of short stories, told from Sephiroth's perspective after the events of 7, sort of his consciousness floating around in the live stream, setting up his reappearance in Advent Children. So it goes Denzel, and then it goes chapter 1 of Black. Next is episode Tifa. I think these events, were somewhat covered in Advent Children Complete, the Blu-ray re-release. It just goes into how Tifa met Denzel. I hope I'm remembering this right. I don't particularly remember too much, because I believe that the Denzel and Tifa episodes were kind of similar. They obviously do tie into each other. Again, fine. After Tifa is the first chapter or first page of the White short story. And the White short story is obviously told from Aerith's perspective on sort of everything that happened with Meteor Fall and so on. Again, they're like half a page to sort of 1 page mini sort of interludes, if you will. After that is episode Barrett. This one probably stuck with me the most, next to Red, if you want to call him Nanaki. I kind of flip-flop between the two. I like calling him Nanaki, it just sounds cooler. The episodes that stuck out at me the most would be Barrett, Nanaki, it's actually called Chapter Nanaki, and episode Shinra, but I'll get to that in a minute. Episode Barrett follows Barrett, obviously, from the end of 7, and it's him sort of traveling the planet. Sid also features heavily in this one. It's him traveling the planet, sort of trying to help Sid find a new source of energy. Barrett's kind of lost. He's kind of lost as to what to do since they defeated Sephiroth and saved the planet, right? But now they're dealing with what are they going to use for energy, right? Because they can't use this game. FF7 came out in 1997, right? I didn't play it until 98, and since 98, so for 25 years, myself and everyone I know has called Mako Mako. M-A-K-O in English says Mako, right? We didn't have any guides to go off of. No one knew it was pronounced Mako. Obviously, it makes sense in katakana or Japanese, Mako. If you wanted us to call it Mako, you should have spelled it differently. M-A-H-K-O. That says Mako. M-A-K-O says Mako. That's how English works. Whatever, you know. I'm going to call it Mako. Don't care if you disagree. I've been saying it for 25 years. Too bad, so sad. So they're like, we can't continue using Mako energy because it's sucking the planet dry. Obviously, we know this. That's what the entire game's been about. Need to find a new energy source. So while Sid's kind of doing his thing, trying to build his new airship, which you see in Advent Children, the Sierra. He's building that. Barrett's off traveling the planet, sort of trying to find himself, dealing with the aftermath of 7, and just traveling and meeting people. Like, this one stuck with me the most, mostly because if Barrett was a real person, he's the kind of person that you'd want to be around. Like, he's a good man. He fights for what he believes in. He's generous, caring, giving. Like, he's one of the fictional characters I would say would be like the ideal role model, next to like Luke Skywalker, Guts from Berserk. I'm sure there are many more. Ideal role model. Like, he's just a good man. But in this, he's kind of lost. Which, you know, he's completed his mission, and now he's like, what do we do? So it's him trying to find a new energy source. My gripe with this chapter is their new alternative energy source that they discover is oil. Now, in the original 7, Mako energy was, from what I thought, was always sort of a stand-in for oil, saying, like, hey guys, if we keep boring all of this out of the earth, if we keep sucking all this up, we're eventually going to bleed the planet dry of fossil fuels, right? And that's not a good thing. So we need to find alternative energy sources, whether they be wind power, solar power, whatever. Like, 7 is I won't say it's heavy-handed, but it can be a little heavy-handed at times with finding alternative, greener energy sources. That's the whole point of 7. And that's when a lot of people got cranky at Square Enix when they released Final Fantasy VII NFTs, right? And NFTs are very energy-heavy, keeping them active and creating more pollution from using so much energy and whatever. And people are like, this is literally the exact opposite of the message of FF7, right? But the alternative energy source they find is oil, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Because that was the whole point of the game, is to say we should stop using oil. So they've just substituted this fictional energy source, which was a stand-in for oil, for actual oil, and they're like, this is way better. So that's a huge gripe I have about this chapter. They could have just made up something else, some other fictional energy source, which is actually on the greener side. But this message was obviously lost on him. What's his name? Kazushige Nojima. Yeah. He I believe he wrote all the sort of expanded media, like the Final Fantasy X-3. Ugh, what a travesty that story was. Just ignore 10-2 onwards. Just play 10 and just be done with it. He's done all these, and for the most part, I enjoyed all of them. They're all good. This is just sort of the one thing that I was just like, come on, man. Like, that was the whole point. Anyway, is that a spoiler? Probably. Okay, so the episode Barrett was good. It was about a man who had a purpose and now has fulfilled his mission, and he's sort of wandering around lost what to do, and he finds a new purpose. Like it's a timeless tale. It's good. After Barrett is the next chapter of Black. I won't go into that. Sephiroth. Episode Nunaki. This one here follows Red, obviously after the events of 7, and he's kind of like, we've saved the planet. Now I'm just sort of gonna travel the world, and he comes to sort of realize that humanity sucks. People are not good people. So he ends up just basically saying, screw this. I'm going to go live in the woods and be the animal that I am, because I'm tired of helping humans, because they can't help themselves, and they're just awful people. So he goes and lives in the woods. I won't go into what happens, but basically towards the end of the story, he kind of snaps out of it, and he's like, you know what? I need to go where I'm needed, which is helping others. The bit that stuck out, that part was like, whatever. The part that stuck with me with this chapter was Vincent is also in this. Red kind of has like a, not a crisis identity crisis, but more like he's more confronted with the reality. He sees some death in this chapter, and he's confronted with the reality that being the species that he is, he's going to outlive all of his friends. Because his species, we don't know how long they live for, but they live for at least 500 years, right? He's gonna outlive all of his friends. So he's like, what's the point? I'm gonna cut myself off and go live in the woods. And then he ends up bumping into Vincent, and they sit down and they have a deep and meaningful conversation. They have a D&M, and Red just unloads, and he's like, I'm gonna outlive everyone. What's the point, or whatever? And Vincent goes, I'm gonna outlive you, my friend. Like, after everyone's dead, even you, I'm still going to be around. I'm going to outlive you. But I came to terms with that a long time ago, yet I haven't resorted to being feral, right? I still do what I can to help others. And the chapter ends with Vincent and Red making like a pact where once a year, at the same time every year, they'll meet in Midgar and just catch up. And they'll do that until it's Red's time to go. And then Vincent's like, I don't know what I'm going to do from then, but you know, I look forward to our yearly meetups, my friend. And that was nice. I would have liked a Vincent chapter where it sort of goes into that, sort of his sort of internal sort of crisis. Like, I'm literally, no one I know is going to be alive, you know, in a few hundred years. So that one was nice, that chapter. Next chapter of White. Episode, again, this is another one of those mispronounced things. Yuffie. If you wanted me to pronounce it Yuffie, you should have spelled it with one F. Y-U-F-I-E says Yuffie. Double F is Yuff. I've been saying Yuffie for 25 years. Get over it. Alright, episode Yuffie. This one didn't particularly stand out. It was fine. There's what do you call it? Sephiroth's disease, the geostigma. That's obviously running rampant all over the world. And Yuffie returns home to Wutai. People are getting sick, and they blame it on her, because no one sort of started getting sick until she returned. So they kind of blame her for bringing in whatever outside disease. And basically it's her searching for this supposed materia that can cure this disease, whatever it is. That's about it. Nothing too groundbreaking there. Next is the third and final Black chapter. Episode Shinra, which follows Rufus. But after that is the final White chapter. Episode Shinra. This chapter I didn't have issues with until I read this. But we'll get into that in a sec. This goes into Rufus's survival. Spoiler. How Rufus survived getting hit in the face, point blank, with diamond weapons attack on Midgar. How he survived that explosion. It goes into that. Hang on, the cat's gonna knock this over. Come on, yeah, go on. He's having a sniff. It goes into how he survived the explosion at the top of that tower. Basically, there was the explosion that you see in 7. You don't really see Rufus get exploded. You see the explosion hit the tower, and then you see Rufus sort of shield himself, and then smoke kind of overtakes everything. So you're just like, okay, he's dead. It wasn't until Advent Children that people were like, oh damn, he's alive, okay. And he's apparently fine, even though he took an explosion to the face. This goes into how he survived. Basically, his dad, President Shinra, built like an escape hatch. There's like a button under the table that he pressed, and basically this slide takes him all the way down to is it the bottom level or the basement? I can't remember if it's, I think it might even be the bottom level. Basically, this slide takes him all the way down to the bottom floor, just like an escape route. But it goes into, there's a lot of internal dialogue and flashbacks as well, with Rufus as a kid dealing with President Shinra. I don't actually know President Shinra's name, first name. I think he's just President. It goes into, emasculating is probably not the right word. Belittling, that's what I'm looking for. It goes a lot into President Shinra belittling Rufus for having questions about whatever it may be. Long story short, he was a terrible dad, basically. So it goes into that. It also goes into the history of how and why this sort of escape thing was built, and how President Shinra would just refuse to use it. There's definitely more to it, but I'm not going to spoil that for you. Basically, the story ends with, even though President Shinra's dead, and Rufus discovers this thing which is basically one last final FU from his dad, which is totally in character for President Shinra. So again, I did enjoy this chapter. Rufus being alive, is that a retcon? I don't know if you'd call it a retcon, because nothing particularly got changed in the continuity, but a lot of people disagree that Rufus should have been brought back. I like Rufus. Rufus is one of my favorite characters in 7. I didn't mind him in Advent Children. I do think he should have died in 7. I do think he should have stayed dead, because his death was, what's it called when someone, not comeuppance. It was with Rufus, it's somewhat in the original game, but also somewhat here, but it doesn't specifically state anything. I'm just kind of reading between the lines, or maybe it's my own interpretation, that a lot of people act the way they do towards Rufus is because of his dad, and I do not believe in the sins of the father. Like, that entire concept to me is just nonsense. Rufus isn't a villain, is he? But he's also not a hero. But I also don't think he's an anti-hero. He's somewhere in the middle between anti-hero and villain. He's kind of, I would put Rufus sort of, he's not as complex as Sephiroth, but he is most certainly, he has much more complexity to him than sort of most of our main heroes. And he's just a boss. Yeah. I enjoyed it, but it's also kind of, not, silly's not the right word. It's believable how he survived, but it's also kind of, it's a little bit of a stretch of the imagination. You kind of have to put your suspension of disbelief. You got to kind of push it a bit. It's fine. It's fine. I enjoyed it for what it was, and I enjoyed reading about the flashbacks between him and his dad. Anyway, I won't harp on that for much longer. Should you read this? Yes, I think you should read it. Who's on the front here who I haven't mentioned? Kate Sith. Kate Sith, I believe, or Reeve, appears in the Denzel chapter. But I don't think Kate Sith appears in it. I believe it's Reeve. I really don't remember. Good read. I enjoyed it. I read it on the train, and after I closed the book, I just kind of sat and stared out the window at the rolling hills going by, and yeah. Holy crap, that's been 20 minutes. It's going to be an hour-long video. I hope not. Okay, next book. I'll try and keep this a bit simpler. The Kids Are Alright, Turk Story. This follows a new character called Evan, I believe his name is. Evan Townsend? Townshend. Sorry, Evan Townshend. And this new character here, I'm not sure if it's pronounced Kyrie. It's Kyrie. I'm not sure if it's Kyrie or Kirie, if it would be in katakana, Kirie. She actually ends up appearing in the first part of FF7 Remake. She's a reporter or something. So I read this after playing Remake, and I was like, oh, that's her. There she is. Okay. So it goes into, it follows this kid. He lives in Midgar, in the slums. There's nothing particularly special about him. But then he ends up getting... Reno and Rude from the Turks actually appear quite heavily in this. They end up... he's like, why are the Turks following me? What have I done? And then they end up pressuring him, kidnapping him. I don't know. They end up taking him to see Rufus. And Rufus basically drops... My father had a lot of illegitimate sons. He was always messing around. You're actually my half brother. Rufus says, I've got quite a few half siblings out there. However, the reason that I'm coming to you is because you actually resemble me. He gets mistaken for Rufus a lot in this book before Rufus comes into it. This is where my gripe begins with. It's either a contradiction. It's a contradiction. You could maybe do a little mental gymnastics and headcanon your own sort of explanation in there. So in this book, Rufus escapes Diamond Weapon's attack by going down a slide, and basically into a safe room. In this, however, Rufus drops on Evan, the guy who... The Rufus that you thought died was actually one of my half-siblings, who I had contacted, prior. He says all politicians have political doubles, okay? And he said, I'm no different. So the Rufus... The Rufus that died during Diamond Weapon's attack wasn't me, it was this body double. Now I'm coming to you to be my body double, okay? You may have to worry about things like attempted assassinations and so on, but I'll pay you handsomely. Now, Rufus being Rufus, I'm not sure if... It's not confirmed whether or not that's what actually happened, or if it's Rufus just kind of trying to spin things, saying he took an explosion to the face, went down this slide and survived, and went, I need a body double to keep myself safe. And now he's coming to Evan and then dropping all this on him. The part that I chuckle at is that you need 2 novels to try to at least to attempt to tell the story of how Rufus survived an attack from a weapon and an explosion to the face. It took 2 novels to try and explain his survival away, and it still couldn't be done. That's how sort of silly it is that he survived. So that's a contradiction there. I do a bit of mental gymnastics, and I sort of headcanon it into, okay, that was actually Rufus that was up there, and then now he's at the point where he's like, I need a body double to keep myself safe. But it doesn't state that at all. So there's a straight up a contradiction unless you go do some sort of headcanoning. So that's that part of the story. It also goes into Evan sort of living in the slums and so on. What it also does is bring Kadaj into this from Advent Children. Another gripe I have with this book is Kadaj's portrayal. It's established in 7 that Genova, or Genova, depending on how you want to want to pronounce it. I've always said Genova again, but then come remake, apparently it's Geneva. Um, Genova's an alien, right? The calamity from the sky is a shapeshifter. Can take on the appearance of anyone. Now, in this, Kadaj, being a remnant of Sephiroth, therefore being a remnant of Genova, is a shapeshifter in this. There's a point where Kadaj is standing in front of Eren, and I'm just going to say Kairi. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Kadaj is standing in front of these two, and they both see a completely different person. So it's not that Kadaj is the shapeshifter per se. Kadaj can make himself appear. He can appear to as someone friendly from their memories or subconscious or whatever. I thought that was an extremely interesting concept, and obviously they don't even go into that in Advent Children. Obviously this came out after Advent Children. I'll get to why it came out afterwards in a sec. This came out after Advent Children, but that's so interesting. And then they didn't even, like... It would have been better if you didn't introduce that element at all, because it wasn't in the movie. So it was odd. He appeared as like a red-headed boy to Evan, and I can't remember who he... I think he just appeared as Kadaj to Kairi. I don't remember. The epilogue to this is post-Advent Children. Evan's actually there in the church at the end of Advent Children when they're healing everyone's geostigma in the pool in the church. Evan's actually there. So that's how you know it's before and after Advent Children. But you would read this after. It's a prequel, and you always read prequels after the thing, because it's obviously going to be, it assumes you've seen or read the original thing. You also bump into Yuffie. Do you bump into Red as well? I think Red is in here, which would also tie into this, because Red is out sort of finding himself and being a beast in the wild, and Yuffie is also out looking for this supposed mythical materia that can heal any ailment. So they kind of overlap a little there. They do bump into each other in this. Do I think you should read this? Yeah. Again, it was entertaining. It was nice to be in this world again, despite the contradiction with Rufus's survival, and also despite the totally different portrayal of Kadaj in this. They may do something with that in the future. You know, they're sort of cherry picking things from various games and so on to put into the remake continuity, and also with Ever Crisis. Give it a read. There's a lot. It's Reno and Rude heavy, and it also goes into Reno and Rude building the monument that you see in Advent Children. There's a lot of that too. Elena and Sang pop into this as well. There's a lot of not a lot of Elena pops in and out. Yeah, give it a read. All right. The third and most recent release is the Traces of Two Paths. Now, it does say here, Final Fantasy VII Remake. It does state, obviously, right there, that it's in the remake continuity. But there's a lot of things in here that make me question that. The book's split into 3 parts. The first part is Tifa's story. Second part is Aerith's story, and the third part is from... I don't believe you ever found out their name. It was just from a first-person point of view, but that was more like a novella. It was a short story, whereas Aerith and Tifa's story they take up the majority of this story. The book starts with the party just leaving Midgar after they've escaped the rollerball on the highway, and they're leaving Midgar. And as they're walking to Calm, Tifa tells her story. Cloud and a couple of others are walking up ahead. Aerith and I think maybe Red. Aerith and Red sort of hang back and listen to Tifa's story. She talks about her side of the events of the Nibelheim incident, She talks about it goes a lot into her growing up in Nibelheim, sort of what she used to do around the town for hobbies and so on. The other friends she used to hang out with, and it goes through her childhood of her friends, sort of leaving Midgar one by one to go and not leaving Midgar, leaving Nibelheim one by one to go to Midgar and find jobs or join soldier or whatever. By the time all the boys have left, it's just Cloud, but he's like a minor character in this. It goes a lot into her relationship with her dad. It goes into a lot of it sets up Nibelheim. It gives a lot of backstory on Nibelheim. Cloud leaves to go join soldier, and then it goes into her dealing with that, and then she meets Master Zangan, and how she learned martial arts, and it goes into all that. Obviously, the no pun intended here, the burning question is, how did Tifa survive Sephiroth's attack? He has a 6-foot sword, and he slashed her across the chest, like close and personal. How did she survive? This goes into that. Which, actually, to my surprise, they somewhat covered the events of this in Ever Crisis, in the mobile game that just came out. They covered it in like an optional side chapter, which I thought was interesting. And I was like, there you go, they're going to somewhat adapt this, like just kind of speed through it, but somewhat adapt it. So it goes into Tifa surviving the attack, and also how she got to Midgar. So the first half of Tifa's story is her upbringing and so on in Nibelheim up until the incident, and then the second half of that is her in Midgar, sort of her dealing with post-surgery life. She's obviously got this scar across her chest with like skin grafts and so on. So it's her dealing with the healing process, and also how she made a living in Midgar, which was selling steamed meat buns. Worked for a fella, and it also went into how she acquired Seventh Heaven, the bar she owns. So there's a lot of blanks filled in, big blanks filled in. Right, it's like if I told you a story, I say, I got hit by a car last year. Obviously I'm okay, but you don't go, did you die? Obviously I'm fine. So I say, I got hit by a car last year, and they say, oh damn, that must have sucked. And you're like, yeah, it did. And then you can talk about your recovery process. This is the same thing. Tifa's talking to Aerith and Red about this incident that happened, and obviously they're not like, did you die? She's like telling her story of the recovery. And it fills in big blanks. Like it makes sense that you would eventually cover that part of the story. It's good. I couldn't put it down. I read the entire thing in one day, and I was like, that was great. Couldn't put it down. It was something that should have been covered in the original game. On to the next part of the story, which is sorry. I believe why it actually has the remake tab there is because her landlord, she rents a little shipping container. Her landlord's name is Marl, and Marl appears in remake. So that's really the only connection it has to the remake game, is her landlord. But it's like, she's such a side character, you could easily work her into the original continuity. This easily fits in the original continuity. Alright, Aerith's story is they're on the ship from Junon to Costa del Sol, which is interesting because it has the remake tag, but those events haven't been covered yet, and I don't actually believe they'll even cover those events in Rebirth. So I don't know what's going on there. Oh, actually, hang on, no. In the Rebirth trailer, you saw Sapphire Weapon, so it must happen at some point. So this is on the ship going from Junon to Costa del Sol, and Aerith's talking to Tifa about how she escaped the Shinra building when she was young. So it goes into her upbringing in the Shinra lab with her mother Ifalna, and sort of all the experiments that they were doing on both of them, especially her mother. They were doing the physical experiments on Ifalna. Aerith was getting more along the experiments of here's paper and crayons, draw what you see, because obviously they're searching for the promised land because it's abundant in Mako energy. So it goes into Ifalna and her relationship with sort of the orderlies and the security guards who work there. It goes into their escape, and it also goes into that. The first half of the story is how they escaped. The second half of the story is Aerith meeting Elmira. In 7, Aerith calls Elmira Mum. She doesn't in this. It builds up to that. So it goes into how they met, building up their relationship. It goes into, Elmira's obviously incredibly stressed and angry all the time because she's waiting for her husband to come back from the war, which if you played 7, no, never happens. So it goes into that, and it also goes into another reason that it has the remake tag subtitle is because it goes into the orphanage that you see in remake, where you find out which is where, I think it was where Wedge grew up. So Wedge and Aerith have a little bit of a sort of an encounter here. It builds up the orphanage, which again you could easily work into the original continuity. And the second half is sort of Elmira and Aerith building their relationship. Again, it's nice. It was a nice story. Couldn't put it down. The next day I read the whole thing in one go, and I was like, that was really nice. The last story, I could have done without. It was like a short story. It was the tale of someone looking for someone who went. They got in a helicopter and went out looking for sites rich in Mako to build Mako reactors. It was their job to go out and survey these sites, get readings on the Mako energy, report back to Shinra headquarters, and they would come and build a reactor. Hang on, they would come and build a reactor. Hang on. Is that the story of the first soldier in Ever Crisis? It could be. Because the character, I'm pretty sure it goes unnamed. It's all first person. This unnamed character is going around meeting like helicopter pilots and digging through like archive files and so on, trying to find out what happened to this person. And this character ends up in Mideel, which is where obviously Cloud and Tifa end up at one point in the original 7, going into Cloud's memories and his trauma and what really happened. It could have done without it, but now that I think about Ever Crisis, it could have been one of those characters. What is it, Matt or Glenn or Lucia? Could have been any one of them. I think they said it was a he, so Matt or Glenn. My gripe about that is it ended where 7 starts. And he ends up, I think he was a security guard or a doctor or something in Aerith's lab. So we knew her as a kid, and the story ends with him bumping into her on the street, and he says, "Do I know you?" And she's like, "No." And then she gives him like a little wink that's like, "Yes, it is me," and he continues on his way. It would be nice if that story ended with the sector, with the Mako reactor exploding at the start of the game, just to sort of tie it in. But okay, now it could be Ever Crisis related. Anyway, again, should you read this? Yes. Out of all these 3 books, this one I enjoyed the most. It filled in the most blanks, and it was a very easy read. My next favorite in line would probably be this one, despite my gripe about the oil. And then this one, it would probably be my least favorite, but that's not saying much because I still thoroughly enjoyed it. 40 minutes, okay. Obviously, these are 2 in the original continuity. This one is in the remake continuity, but easily can work in the original continuity. In fact, I even have it in my little spreadsheet of my FF7 timeline. I've got this sandwiched into the original continuity because it works perfectly. If you've only played 7 and haven't read or watched or done anything else, if you've only played original 7, you will still know what is going on. You will understand everything in this story. It's great. I thoroughly enjoyed this. In future videos, I'll go into other things, like I'll talk about what I like about Ever Crisis, the mobile game, and I'll just even do some other book reviews. I'm doing a lot of Star Wars, the original continuity reading. I don't like calling it Legends. I prefer to call it the original EU continuity. So I'm doing a lot of reading of those. I'll do reviews on those. Speaking of Star Wars, I think it was Traces of Two Paths. Obviously, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who did Final Fantasies 1 through 10, Obviously, he was a big Star Wars fan because most Final Fantasies will have Star Wars references in them. For example, Final Fantasy VI, when Locke comes in to rescue Celes, again, I don't know how to pronounce her name, dressed in the Imperial trooper armor. He walks in the room and she goes, "Aren't you a little short to be an Imperial trooper?" Obviously, that's the original Star Wars. Necron in FF9 straight up quotes Yoda, where he's like, hate leads to pain and pain leads to suffering, whatever the quote is. That's straight up Yoda. And there's quite a few, like the life stream. The life stream is straight up, and the far plane from FF10. That's straight up the cosmic force. You know, when you die, you return to the cosmos. Your energy returns to the cosmos, and it's like a big cycle. That's the life stream of the far plane, straight up. But in this one, when Tifa starts working part-time at Seventh Heaven, the first drink she learns to make is a Corellian gangbuster. And if you know your Star Wars, Corellia is Han Solo's home planet. Anyway, that's it. I knew it was all connected somehow. Give them a read. I thoroughly enjoyed them. In the meantime, I'm going to keep playing Ever Crisis, and I have pre-ordered my deluxe edition of Rebirth, which I'm very much looking forward to, despite how I feel about the story changes at the end of Remake. But I'll do that in a separate video. Anyway, thank you for watching. Give them a read. Let me know what you think. That was cringy.